Hello, I'm Burt Lancaster. On the 8th of October, 1941, the war between Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia had been underway for almost 4 months. On that day, Hitler's propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, broadcast from Berlin that Moscow had fallen. Hitler's troops, he said, could see the Kremlin towers from their front lines. Another 4 or 5 days, and the swastika flag would fly over the Kremlin. Germany believed these reports, so did many others. After all, Hitler had conquered Western Europe. He had blitzed London. But here, in this area, some 16 miles from the Kremlin, and commemorated by these symbolic anti-tank obstacles, the Nazi blitzkrieg came to an end. Here, in the Moscow suburbs, the Red Army and hundreds of thousands of ordinary men, women, and children threw up barriers which the Nazi tanks could not crack. Here the tide was turned in the unknown war on the Eastern Front. On November 7th, as always, the Soviet Union celebrated its national holiday. Stalin addressed the troops in Red Square and then watched as Red Army units paraded past him through the snow and onto the front. In early December, the Red Army counterattacked. They pushed back Hitler's armies as far as 125 miles from Moscow. It was the first time in the Second World War that the mighty Nazi Wehrmacht was stopped. Our story, the battle for Moscow.
Moscow, the heart of Russia. Moscow, where modern Russia began, where Vladimir Lenin lived and worked and planned the development of the Soviet state, and where his body lies for eternity. The Kremlin, the nerve center of the Soviet Union. From here, the Stavka, the Soviet High Command, directed the unknown war. In 1941, its bright towers and gold onion domes were daubed with gray-green paint, camouflage against the Nazi bombers. Anti-aircraft guns put up a barrage from the roof of the Moscow Hotel. In the summer of 1941, Moscow took on the look of war. On June 22nd, Hitler had launched Operation Barbarossa with the intention of annihilating the Soviet Union, occupying the motherland of Russia, and exterminating her people. It was to be an epic battle. But the people of Moscow, sending their husbands, sons, and brothers to the front, still hoped that the war would be a short one. Yesterday, life in Moscow had been normal. People were thinking about their vacations, enjoying the welcome warmth of the summer. The Bolshoi was completing its season, with the great ballerina Ulanova dancing. now suddenly all that changed. By mid-July, the Wehrmacht had already covered half the distance to Moscow, Hitler's prime. They thought the war would be a short one. Vienna, Prague, Brussels, The Hague, Copenhagen, Oslo, Paris, Belgrade, Warsaw lay behind them. Moscow would be next. In July, the first serious air raids came to Moscow, and with them a growing awareness of danger. More anti-aircraft guns were mounted, and the defenses were dug, the women alongside the men. At Smolensk, the Red Army was fighting with all its strength to protect Moscow. Some German tank crews were attacked so furiously that they could not open their turret hatches. Even Hitler was forced to acknowledge what he called the savage determination of the Russian infantry. The battle in and around Smolensk itself lasted 10 weeks. 10 Soviet divisions were caught in the Smolensk pocket. They made the Germans fight for every city block. Much of it destroyed, Smolensk was in German hands by the beginning of September. Its defense had bought time, but at fearful cost to the Red Army. At the end of the month, the German High Command assessed the total Russian losses over all the front at 2.5 million men, 22,000 guns, 18,000 tanks, and 12,000 aircraft. Almost exactly the figures for the total Russian strength the Nazis had thought they would have to face and to overcome to win the war. German intelligence had blundered. The Russians were fighting as hard as ever, and Moscow was still over 200 miles away. By now, the air assault on Moscow had begun in earnest, delivered by the same squadrons that had bombed London, Liverpool, Warsaw, Rotterdam, and Belgrade. The Moscow subway system, one of the most spacious in the world, became a shelf set up its new offices, working on while the battle continued in the night sky. In the first month of their raids on Moscow, the Nazis lost 200 of their bomber pilots. While below, the children grew accustomed to this new way of life and made a game of it. bombing did not seriously interrupt Moscow's industries. Most of the capital's plants had already switched to armaments. Despite the heavier raids of August and September, their output increased. They rushed it straight to the front. Occasionally, there was heavy damage by fire as well as by high explosives. The attack was indiscriminate. It even damaged the embassies of Germany's allies. More and more often, the Soviet fighters scrambled and the siren sounded. Moscow's landmarks began to suffer. Moscow University, the famous Vakhtangov Theater, the Prague restaurant, and even the Kremlin suffered minimal damage from a bomb. And it gave Moscow's children a new hobby, collecting souvenirs, bomb fragments made in Germany. As far as possible, the Muscovites lived their lives as usual. From time to time, they woke to find fresh evidence of the night's activities. It was not encouraging. The Nazis were very far from being contained. In the middle of September, the Fuhrer decided to intervene in person. North and south, however, the Nazis were still grinding towards Moscow. It was the hour of decision. Early in October, Stalin summoned General Zhukov to Moscow from his Leningrad command, intending to place him in command of the Western Front protecting Moscow. That front was beginning to crumble away. Zhukov recalls those days.
7 числа я вылетел в Москву. В Москву прилетел уже вечером и сразу же направился.
I arrived in Moscow on the evening of October 7th and immediately went to Stalin's apartment in the Kremlin. He had the flu, but he was working.
Поздоровавшись, кивком головы, он предложил посмотреть на карту и сказал: вот смотрите, какая сложилась обстановка на западном направлении.
He greeted me with a nod and pointed to the map in front of him. Look at the front, he said. I can't get an exact report on what's happening, where the enemy is, where our troops are.
Если вы можете, поезжайте немедленно в штаб Западного фронта.
If you can, go straight to Western Front headquarters and study the situation there. Call me anytime, day or night. I'll be waiting.
В западном направлении сложилась крайне опасная
The
обстановка.
situation on the Western Front was very dangerous. Practically all the roads to Moscow were open.
By now, the Nazi panzers were in trouble. Soviet resistance was stiffening all the time, and rain and sleet turned the country roads to mud. Goebbels announced a temporary halt due to weather conditions. On October 20th, Guderian's panzers reached Tula, 100 miles south of Moscow, but could not take it. Tula defied Guderian. Its troops were reinforced with 4,000 men from the workers' battalions, and it fought on as the panzers bypassed it, racing for Moscow. While the militiamen of Tula prepared to defy the German flood, Guderian's panzers had been attacked by some new Russian tanks, the new T-34s, and they were superior to anything in the German arsenal. Up to this point, Guderian concluded early in October, we had enjoyed tank superiority, but from now on, the situation was reversed. In one area, the German operations map showed obstacles at 2 military schools. Here, a handful of cadets, young boys, stood against the weight of the Wehrmacht, expecting only to delay the enemy for as long as they could. They succeeded, at the cost of their lives. The longer the Red Army could delay the Nazis, the more time to regroup and resupply. The Soviet strategy was to blunt the Panzer's strength from their fixed positions, build up overwhelming reserves, then counterattack. All along the front, Russian units spent themselves, and with them his general, Ivan Panfilov. Tens upon tens of thousands of Russians died shielding Moscow. Moscow waited. Hitler had promised Mussolini, the town will fall without the loss of a single man. Zhukov knew that the Nazis were readying themselves for a final lunge. The German orders for dealing with Moscow were already in print for use by the SS. First, seize the Moscow Communist Party Committee. Then the headquarters of the International Organization of Workers' Aid. Then the information services and the militia headquarters at 38 Petrovka Street. And then there would be a Nazi victory parade on November 7th in Red Square, by invitation only. In the middle of October, conditions had been such that Moscow might cease to be an effective seat of government. Stalin and the Politburo stayed to command the defense. In defiance of the German threat, on November 7th, the traditional Soviet military parade took place in a light fall of snow.
Товарищ красноармейцы, краснофлотцы, командиры политработных,
Comrades, Red Army and Red Navy men, officers and political workers, men and women partisans. The whole world is looking upon you as the power capable of destroying the German robber hordes. The enslaved peoples of Europe are looking upon you as their liberators. Be worthy of this great mission. The war you are waging is a war of liberation, a just war.
By the end of February, the chief of the German General Staff reported 112,000 of his men were suffering from frostbite. They were the lucky ones. 202,000 Germans had been killed, 46,000 were missing in action, 725,000 had been wounded. The Nazis no longer fought for an ideal or an ideology, for the Führer or the fatherland. They fought blindly to survive, to get to a warm place. The intensity of the counteroffensive raised the battle to a gigantic scale. Counting both sides, it involved some 3 million men, 2,500 tanks, nearly 2,000 planes, and more than 20,000 guns and mortars. The full force of the Soviet counteroffensive abated. Home was home, wrecked or not. The mayor could resume his duties, and naturally began with a speech. Once more, the Red Army went on its way. The Red Army was advancing into a wasteland of smoke and blackened ruins. The Nazis even burned what grain they could not carry. In places, enough for an entire town. But sometimes it could be salvaged. The Germans in retreat destroyed wantonly, leaving a litter of precious things, the souvenirs of a lifetime. The town of Klin, home of the genius of Russian music, Tchaikovsky. The Nazis burned the original score of his Sixth Symphony. Yasnaya Polyana, the home of Tolstoy. In this room, Tolstoy wrote War and Peace. The Nazis used it for a barracks. When they left, they set it afire. Then they defiled Tolstoy's grave. Nothing was sacred. If they spared the priest, the Nazis left the sanctuary a charnel house. The Red Army's combat cameramen began to reveal the first evidence of German atrocities and of the agony they caused the survivors. Hitler had called it the New Order. It was new, and it was bestial. It treated human beings as if they were mere objects. It reduced people to nothing. The New Order valued no lives but German lives. It left the dead anonymous. And annihilated families. The New Order degraded whatever it touched and scarred the souls of those who survived it. The battle for Moscow was the Wehrmacht's first major defeat. The Soviets had achieved three things. They had saved their capital. They had shattered the myth of German invincibility forever. And they had shown the world Russia's ability to turn the tide. Russia's allies marveled at her ability to resist. Sir Anthony Eden, Britain's Foreign Secretary. Averell Harriman, President Roosevelt's special envoy, had arrived earlier for talks with Stalin. He remembers.
And this was in September, late September, early October, 1941. The Germans were at the gates of Moscow, you remember. And many military men thought it was impossible for Moscow to hold out. Stalin was determined, and the Russian people responded. We had spent 4 nights with Stalin, and we came away convinced that Moscow was whole.
For a moment, the Soviets enjoyed a hard-won respite. But Hitler's plans held no comfort. He said, as soon as the weather and the state of the terrain allows, we must seize the initiative again. And through the superiority of German leadership and the German soldier, force our will upon the enemy. Still within striking distance of Moscow, there would be other battles to come, many battles. The unknown war had only just begun. There would be 3.5 more years of battles. Our next story, the Siege of Leningrad. For 900 days, the people of Leningrad withstood the Nazi army surrounding them. They died by the tens of thousands, of starvation, of bombs, of shells, but they would not surrender. And Leningrad became one of the hero cities of the unknown war.